You're listening to Science and Saucery, a show dedicated to adding life to your years. And now your hosts, registered dietitian Juliana Hever and scientist Ray Cronice.
Welcome.
Hello.
It's a bonus session this week.
But history was made yesterday, and you were a part of it. And I thought it would be really neat if you shared some of your wisdom and your amazing experiences in the whole NASA world. And not only did I think that and say that to you, but when you posted your commemoration to Konrad Dannenberg, you had some comments and we got some messages suggesting the same thing, because you can explain the real significance of what happened yesterday. I was really honored to be there with you, by the way. It's my first time ever watching a launch, and to watch it with you was spectacular. Very exciting.
Yeah,
So
it was
tell
fun.
us.
Well, I mean, obviously I played really no role in what happened yesterday other than to watch it with everyone else and share. But, you know, going back to Ray 1.0, this is sort of Ray 3.0. And going back to Ray 1.0, all of what I did was centered on space exploration and opening up commercial spaceflight. That was my passion for, 20 years. And it was really only with my children that came along and some entrepreneurial opportunities that I had that I walked away from that. And it's a real valid question. Someone might say, well, why would you leave NASA? And I think if we unpack those years and, since that time when I started, if we unpack those years, I think yesterday is a really good reason why, I left all those years ago.
Ever since I've known you, you've talked about this vision of commercialization of space travel, and I didn't quite understand what that meant.
So this really starts 36 years ago for me. And even if I want to go back before that, it starts with buying Carl Sagan's Cosmos, the book. And the series, it was on PBS, Cosmos, the original one, and it would come on Sunday morning and Saturday evening. And so I would actually watch it twice because I couldn't really record it. And so I would watch every episode twice, and it was one of the very first books that I actually went to the bookstore to buy. And I would say I was in probably around 10th grade when that came out, so I was in high school. And during that same time, I was actually taking German class. So that was the language I studied in high school at the time. German was one of those languages. It was considered a science language. A lot of chemistry is in German. A lot of the stuff on my shelf there is in German, from the 19th century. And one day, a woman by the name of Frau Heller was a substitute for German class. And I had been watching those Cosmos series and found out that she was the widow of one of the German rocket scientists that came here to Huntsville. And so, a whole group of engineers, accountants, program managers. I mean, they weren't all scientists and they weren't all rocket engineers, but they all came here after they left from Peenemünde, where they surrendered to the Americans, and they went through a project called Project Paperclip to Fort Bliss. And then from Fort Bliss, they came to Huntsville, and they set up what was here called the Redstone Arsenal, and that eventually became NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. And so on this fateful day where this person had substituted for my German instructor, I was able to really realize, wow, these people were all still alive. And of course, by this time, all the early space stuff, we were in Huntsville, Rocket City, USA, and everyone knew about these men, but I don't know, I just never thought about it in a really contemporary way. I didn't think about the idea of them being there. And so she said, yes, you should come to the Stammtisch, which is every third Thursday of the month, they would have this thing called a Stammtisch in German, but it's like a get together, and they would eat German food and drink beer, and at this local restaurant here called Old Heidelberg. And so anyway, I went to that meeting, and she said, you can practice German. And I did. I was trying my best to speak German with all these guys. And what was so fascinating, I was so excited about space. And by this time, these guys had mostly been forgotten. This is, Wernher von Braun had already died by this point, and the Apollo program was gone. We were well into getting ready for the space shuttle to start flying. So NASA Marshall Space Flight Sphere was tied up in the propulsion for that. And what was really neat, and these guys all retired from NASA about 1973. So you can imagine, they were retirees at 73, and now this is 84. I mean, no, I'm sorry. This is this is 1980. Let's just say. And so, anyway, trying to fast forward this, I ended up befriending a lot of these guys, and I went there every Thursday without fail. Like I always would go, and my German got better and better and better. And I would just hear these stories. And to them, they were fascinated that someone young was really even interested in space, because stuff had moved on. We're talking about MTV and, big hair, rock and roll and whatever. Space wasn't in the forefront exactly at that time. The shuttle hadn't gone yet. And still, even after the shuttle went, it sort of faded. So anyway, fast forward, I was able to spend so much quality time with these guys about the future of space and how we could colonize Mars and how we could do this and how we could do that. So when we finished all this, I went on to school, and from that point forward, I was going to work for NASA. I was going to be a scientist at NASA. I wanted to, eventually fly and be an astronaut, and I was just excited about all of this. And so fast forward a little bit in the whole process. I started in NASA 36 years ago in 1984, and I was working there in a laboratory and in a physical and analytical chemistry laboratory, and I was writing all around. And that's when we've heard from Peter Diamandis, but that's when I met Peter Diamandis and founded a local chapter of a organization called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. And so I co-chaired that organization nationally. Peter had been at the MIT chapter, taught Hawley, did GWU, University of Toronto was Bob Richards, Jeff Bezos was the Princeton chapter. It was really a whole bunch of us doing all of this stuff, and we all were so excited about private spaceflight and doing things. And I won the Arthur C. Clarke Award one year for being an outstanding student or having an outstanding chapter, which was really great. And so this was just all my life. My life was around staging events at my university. We would get NASA to bring out all these big 1/25th scale models, these tall, towering 30-foot models of rockets and shuttles. And we'd do Space Week, and we'd have all these lecturers, and I would have Buzz Aldrin come in or Alan Bean come in, or all these kinds of different people that were just figures in the space industry. All the while still working with, Konrad Dannenberg and Ernst Stühlinger and just all the German scientists. I would always be hanging out. And our goal, once I met Peter Todd's since passed away, but Peter, Todd, and Bob Richards, and then also eventually Byron Lichtenberg, who was a payload specialist that had flown twice on the orbiter, and he and I would speak back to back at Space Camp. So I was a lecturer there at Space Camp. So I would go after work at NASA. I would come in and I'd speak to students, and just everything in my life involved around space. And what Peter and Byron and all of us were really trying to do is get space to be private. So whereas Byron and I were kind of in the government world, he was actually a payload specialist, which is wasn't a career astronaut. This was a person that was brought on specifically for a science payload. But anyway, we all worked together to try to push this idea of private space. And coming at this and trying to first try to figure out how we could, if you will, through benign conspiracies, hijack orbiters. Could we get someone on the orbiter? Could we find a launch system? Could we, rent a launch system from another country? What could we do? I mean, everything was possible. What all three of us knew then was that we really wanted to be the ones to help push this idea of a commercial spaceflight. And the way Peter would always say it is, until we have an exothermic economic reaction in space. And an exothermic reaction is one that gives off more energy than it consumes. So an economic one, something that space was expensive. And so this became the basis of, back to Konrad Dannenberg, one of the German scientists, this became the basis of a debate that we had for 27 years until he passed away in 2009. We always got together. I would take him for breakfast at IHOP. I would take him to Cracker Barrel. We would get together all the time. I would go by and just sit at his house and we drink beer together. It was just such a fun time. I mean, I had so many dozens and dozens and dozens of hours with him, which was just spectacular to be able to do. So bringing this all to a close in terms of that, I had my 15-year career there at NASA and left in 1999. And by that time, NASA was really a shell of the organization. I mean, it was already a shell of what it had been, I think, in the 60s and 70s. So I came there. I got to see some really good stuff because when I was there at the height of shuttle flights. I was there for Challenger. I was working on O-rings when Challenger happened, so I got to watch all that with a front row seat. And then I was also working on the spray-on foam installation, the SOFI. And so even though Columbia happened after I left, one of the things I was working on specifically was something that a report that we had been talking about delamination of foam. It was a project I worked on, and we said, hey, clearly there's this problem where the foam, this is, you imagine it's like the spray foam you get, great stuff. It used to get sprayed on the outside of the external tank, and that helps keep the cryogenic fuels, in that case hydrogen and oxygen, cold. And, you know, originally the very first space shuttle, you'll see a couple, first one or two, they actually painted it white, but they took the paint off for weight concerns. And this foam would sometimes get moist or wet or whatever out in Florida, and then eventually a big chunk would fall off. And eventually what happened with Columbia was, you know, that unlike Challenger, it made it into orbit. It did its whole mission. It was a microgravity space lab mission. I knew people that were on there very well. And then when it came back, well, on the way up, I should say, a chunk of this foam fell off, hit the leading edge of the orbiter, and when it came back, that hole allowed hot plasma gases to get in, and it basically just melted the structure inside, and it just, you know, fell apart in the upper atmosphere. So I was there towards the beginning. I was certainly there for Challenger, and I was certainly understood specifically what was going on in the Columbia days. But in between then, I had so much fun. You know, I was assistant mission scientist for 4 Space Lab missions. I flew 2 payloads on the orbiter. John Glenn operated one of mine. If I, I got right up there. If I pick John Glenn's memoirs off, he turned to the page. He said, one of his favorite experiments that he was asked to operate was aerogel. And so it was really kind of fun to have been able to do that. And of course, during this time in 1993, which is, what is that? That's 27 years ago. Peter, Byron, and I were sitting in a bar this summer. It was during the end of the summer. We were sitting in a bar here in Huntsville, and we decided, hey, we want to really commercialize space. How do we make this happen? And our 3 ideas were that we could, do a zero-G flight, where we could do a plane that did parabolic flight. I was doing that for my career. Byron had done it a lot of times. Peter hadn't. I think we talked a little bit about that on the episode with Peter Diamandis. And then, of course, Byron had 2 space flights. And then the other thing was suborbital flights. We could somehow contract and build a rocket. But the question is, well, how can you build a rocket that looks like an intercontinental ballistic missile? This is a suborbital rocket like what Jeff Bezos is doing for his or for the tourism is, it goes up and it just makes a really big arc and comes back down and lands about where it started. So you can imagine that kind of looks like a missile going from place to place. Then the final thing was, we could find a way to commercialize, because at that point Byron was working with the Russians. They had just started opening up. Perestroika happened in 1988, and so the whole Soviet Union was falling, and so there was more access to them. Money talked in Russia at that point in time. So he had done some experiments with his company, Payload Systems, and was able to fly experiments up onto Mir, which was really a breakthrough at that time. We felt like those were the 3 options, and of the 3, the one that seemed the most fiscally practical was zero-G. And so I applied for outside activity with NASA because you had to have approval if you had an outside company, and I got permission to do 0G. And then Peter tells the story in the other one, but basically he read a book about why Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic for the Orteig Prize. Another mutual friend of ours, Greg Marinack, had given him this book, and Byron and he were doing the X Prize, and they wanted me to be part of that as well, because that was the middle idea. If we could have a contest to get someone to design a rocket, the idea behind a prize is that, yes, someone spends 10 times the prize money to win it, because it's about winning the prize. It's not about making money on the prize money. But what you don't get when those prize happens, for every person that wins, there's 5 or 7 or 8 teams that don't win, but they all spent time and money and effort in technology. And often those guys go on to commercialize things first. This is what we've seen throughout the time in prizes. Another really important person that came into my life in the mid-90s was Burt Rutan. And I met Burt at the unveiling of the X Prize under the St. Louis Arch, where our Crocs in the Kitchen friends, Brian and Jessica, live. So NASA forbid me for being a part of it. So they wouldn't give me approval to be one of the co-founders, or I would have been an X Prize co-founder as well at that time. So I had to make my choices. We were doing 0G. We were trying to raise money and raise capital for doing that. I think that was 95, or I think it was 95 that we did that. And then I met Burt Rutan. And so in 1998, I was up speaking for NASA at a big air show, the National Air Show. It was called Oshkosh, and every year I got to go fly up there. At that time, I was getting my pilot's license. I was flying. I mean, I was just like, everything was aviation and space. That's what I would live, breathe, and work. And it was a great time doing amazing fun things, just incredible. I was going down to NASA, zip on my flight suit, and I'd go fly 0G, and we'd have just all these amazing stories, and the science we were doing in the lab was great. I had funding, had students that were working. It was just an incredible time. But we ended up in Oshkosh. We were sitting under the wing of a Long Easy, which is a plane that Burt Rutan had designed. We were talking about the idea that one of the German rocket scientists, one of the Wernher von Braun team members, had just passed away, and he said it was just too bad that they were all gone. And I said, well, a lot of them are still alive. There are many of them still alive. And he was really surprised that any of them were still alive. And so we began talking, and this started our relationship, where he became a close mentor of mine in terms of innovation. And so that this isn't just a podcast about me. And I know that we wanted to do this for the sake of putting this story in context and people knowing that background. I decided to invite Burt to do an interview, and this is going to make this episode go longer, but I thought it would be a really good way to wrap this up and sort of put it all into that kind of context, and I'll come back to the finish of this afterwards. So for those of you that don't know aviation, Burt Rutan is probably one of the most innovative aeronautical engineers of the 20th century. He's got such a radical departure in design in terms of planes designed for their function, not necessarily that look like you would expect a plane to look like. But the most important thing, I guess, is he has this uncanny ability to cut through and see innovation where no one else does. So I want to try to put that in proper context. I'm not doing him full service in this introduction, but I just wanted to put this in perspective, and I think in our conversation you'll hear some of the breadth and reach that he's had in aviation. So I believe he's designed around 49 aircraft total. He has 5 aircraft on display in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. He's got a BS in aeronautical engineering, but he also has 5 or 6 honorary doctorate degrees, hundreds of awards from the industry. Every major award you can imagine in aviation, he's won. And for me, it was this opportunity that's come along several times in my life to meet and get to work closely with somebody that helped me think more clearly about innovation and design. And what I think Burt does is give a lot more context to what was going on with everyone. So, with that, I'd like to bring in Burt Rutan. Burt, welcome to Science and Saucery.
Hey, is this the real Ray Cronus?
This is the real Ray Cronus. Is this the real Burt Rutan?
It is. Exactly.
How are you today?
I have been a lot worse.
Been a lot worse.
Actually feeling pretty good up here in North Idaho.
I cannot wait to visit you there. That cabin looks beautiful.
Well, we'd be happy to host you. I've been asking old-time friends to come up. And what I do is I put you on a voice memos, throw it on a table in front of us. So we talk for hours. Old friends remember different things than I do.
Right.
And I remember some things that they don't. So it's really fun for both of us.
Yeah. And, you know, we both really bracket in an age group. You know, you with the early days actually meeting Warner von Braun, and me coming along. You know, I was born in 64. So by, you know, really my first launches that I remember, really Skylab and some of the later Apollo launches, I did see them on TV, but I never saw one in person. But
my God, I didn't realize you're such a youngster.
Yeah, I'm just a kid.
You're 56, right?
Yeah, I'll be 56 this year, 55 right now. So, but tell me what it was like for you during the Apollo days and how that changed your career and your trajectory.
Well, of course, I graduated from college halfway between Gagarin and the moon landing. And I took for that time period, a very strange career path. And the decision that I made turned out to be the best decision I ever made, and that is to not go into the space program because I was too late. 1965 in June, there wasn't really any configuration design to go or any preliminary design. You know, we're talking about just getting Gemini flights going. And the decision to do Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, which is a wonderful story. I'll tell it if we get time here. The decision to do that was real early in the program. And right away, there were contracts let to Grumman and North American to go out and build hardware. And it's just a marvelous story of the 60s. I tell it with a lot of emotion when I give my lectures, because people, it was a totally different feeling of what we have now. Now we think that Musk is moving fast. Well, hell no, he's moving extremely slow. I'm a big fan of Musk for reusing boosters. That's the only thing really significant that's happened. But my God, we got Gemini going and flew 10 manned flights in a period of just a handful of years. And what Musk did last week is certainly a nicer looking cabin, but it's essentially what the Gemini guys did.
Right. From just a pure technology, other than the fact that he has the ability for ongoing production, and we sort of avoided that.
Don't get me wrong. It's very different, but as far as where he went, putting two people into low Earth orbit and doing rendezvous, that was something that was done in 65, 66. So it's not that he's doing breakthrough flights.
Right.
Of course, if he goes to Mars, then it's all different. I agree with Bill Whittle, and he says, no, the Mars landing will be your Apollo 11. You remember what Bill Whittle said in the last minute of his big series. Just just it's something that brings tears to my eyes every time I run it.
Right. That whole series is amazing.
You know, but what happened? Let me go back to essentially high school. I had picked to go to Cal Poly. I didn't have grades good enough to go into the big schools, but I was accepted at Cal Poly. It was strange because there's no way I could get into Cal Poly nowadays with the rules that they restrictions that they have on your background. With the background that I had, couldn't even get into Cal Poly now. Although I finished third in my class and I got their very first honorary doctorate, and I gave the commencement address at Cal Poly. So it was quite a path from high school deciding what job to take. I picked Air Force flight testing because I thought by going straight to flight tests of new types, I would learn better things about being an airplane designer. And that's really what I wanted to do. I never saw myself as being a spaceship designer or a rocket booster designer or a lunar lander designer. That was so far out there that and there were a lot of people that had experience doing it. Most of them were very young, but I was maybe 5 years too late to make a mark in the Apollo program.
Right.
I was 5 years too old. And well, let me ask, how old were you in '65?
So I was 1.
Oh,
That's right.
yeah.
I definitely wasn't making, the only marks I was making it was in my typers.
Let's go into you and me meeting.
Yeah.
We were at grass at Oshkosh,
Mm-hmm.
out amongst the experimental airplanes. And you mentioned to me that, hey, the old timers, I know them and they would love to meet you.
Mm.
And I was frankly shocked. I knew that von Braun had died in '77. He was my mentor. He was number one on that list of people that I thought that made the big difference in aerospace the first 100 years. I just assumed that all of the paperclip guys were dead.
Right.
I didn't do the calculation to say, well, wait a minute. There's some of them are late 80s, and there's got to be a bunch of them still alive. But when you invited me to go to Huntsville, my God, I was going to get to meet paperclip von Braun rocket scientists, and they actually wanted to meet me. You can't believe how excited I was to make that trip.
And for me too, because to back up and sort of interlay my story here, it was really watching Carl Sagan on the series Cosmos that got me sucked into space, and I would watch it Saturday night and Sunday morning. They played it twice at PBS, and so I would actually watch it. I didn't have any way to record it or anything, so I would watch it twice, and it was the first book that I went down. I'd have my mom take me to go buy. I still have it. And so
Cosmos was wonderful. Absolutely.
It was. And it was so inspirational. I mean, like his stories of Flatland and all the things that were in there. So it turned out a substitute teacher for my German class was Frau Heller, who was one of the widows of one of the German team here. And she invited me to a Stammtisch, which is this, every third Thursday of the month, they would have this thing at the German restaurant, and they would all get together. And I came in, and she said, yes, come practice your German. I'm like, I'm going to meet these heroes. I felt the same way as you. I didn't even know these people around. Now, to put this in perspective, this would be about 1980. So they had all retired around 73 or so. When Rocco Petrone came in, he sort of cleared out all of that Peenemünde team from the management structure.
Yeah, and they sent von Braun to Washington, and his wife loved it because there were better restaurants there.
Right.
But von Braun didn't want to go. Well, listen, that brings up something that I'm not going to talk about on this interview. And I think you probably know in detail the story that I've related. Actually, I related at an AIAA meeting and at a Marshall Center Management Club meeting. That story is if you look at all the details, especially after I went back, and here's Ernst Stuhlinger and I in the von Braun archive with the white gloves on, and they bring out were you there then?
Yes, I was there with you. Yeah, we were looking at all of his notebooks.
Wasn't that something when Ernst told to me, and he says, us old timers refer to that as house arrest?
Yes.
Ernst met me in the hallway after the IAA meeting. He said, Mr. Rutan, us old timers talk about that only at home when we're alone. We've never heard anybody say that publicly. But anyway, it's that's all I'm going to say here, because I want to tell that story properly in all of its detail with all the background information when I write my autobiography.
And I think the interesting part, I remember the moment when you were going through von Braun's notebook and Ernst was showing you how he would have the columns and do the check off on the tasks, the people he talked to.
And in his eyes when he was reading that thing in German that had the inboard profile in it that everybody uses in all their von Braun bios.
Right.
But he had not read the book. He had not read the document before, and he's translating it in English, and tears are running down his face with CBS cameras running. And those idiots didn't even run that. They have some wonderful stuff in the can, and they're too stupid to use it.
Yeah. But you remember turning to Conrad Dannenberg and asking him about a bullet there. You said, hey, Connie, what happened on here? And all of a sudden, to your surprise...
Wait. Wasn't that Stuhlinger?
No, it was Conrad who did it. You did it to him, and Conrad immediately answered you.
Wait a minute. I was in the archive area 2 different occasions. The last one was with Ernst Stuhlinger.
Ernst and Conrad were there, I believe, both times.
Oh, they were both there. But the cameras, as I recall, were aimed at me with
Ernst
on my right.
Yes, that's true.
But I don't remember that Conrad was there.
Yes, Conrad was there too.
Well, like I say, you remember different things.
Yes.
And that helped me a lot.
But I remember you asked him this question, and I don't remember what the details were.
In the date of that, because I need to get some dates.
Yeah, I have that on film too, so we can definitely cross-reference to that.
Oh.
So
okay.
But you ask him this question, and suddenly Conrad, as if he were right in the moment, started answering you. And you just looked at him with your mouth open, just jaw dropped at how sharp both Conrad and Ernst were at that age. They remembered all of this stuff. I mean, we lost so much. It was just amazing what they knew.
Well, they would never, ever say anything bad about the U.S. government or NASA because they were so appreciative of the fact after the war, they got to do what was the most fun thing in the world to do, and that is human spaceflight.
Right.
I've got to tell that story in the kind of detail that's never been written before, and you're going to help me. You're going to help me tell that. You were a big part of me learning a lot of stuff then.
Yeah, it was a great time, and obviously you were teaching me. I was deciding whether I wanted to stay at NASA or not, and I had you, and you were just giving me that encouragement, saying, "Hey, look, be an entrepreneur, take those risks." But I remember I got the offer at one time from our center director to come out there for a couple of years. They were going to give me some budget and some money to do a program and sort of bring me back from microgravity and get into propulsion. And you said, Ray, you can come out here and we will have an amazing time. But if you really think you're going to go back and make anything happen there in a different way, it's probably a long shot.
No. And they realize that. Now, I know that I learned about them still being alive and them wanting to meet me. It had to be late July because it was at Oshkosh. Do you remember which year?
1998. So we met
98.
1998.
And I think it was just after
Yes.
that I had my heart attack.
I don't remember the heart attack then, but I
had an MI, a very mild one.
Yeah, actually you do, because I remember us talking about it. We went out for barbecue at one point. You and Tanya and Laurent and I went to barbecue, and I remember you talking about diet and your heart then. So for sure.
Oh, okay. I must have had the attack in April or something. But it wasn't a drop down heart attack. I just had this very strange gurgling kind of feeling in my chest. And I said to Tanya, drive me to the hospital. There's something really weird going on. And I waited in the waiting room for an hour and a half. And finally they brought me in. And then all of a sudden, I was laid out, surrounded by doctors with all kinds of equipment. And they said, you are having a heart attack. And I said, oh, well, I hope you guys are good at this. But that started my health problems.
Yes. So you came here in October of 1998. And if you remember, I had a payload on the shuttle coming up. John Glenn was operating my aerogel payload. And so I just gotten back from training him. And that launch, I think, happened right at the end of October, really right after you came.
So I came to Huntsville within 3 months of us meeting on the grass in Oshkosh.
Yep, absolutely.
And because I had that heart problem, I decided to, I was too bored to jog or to lift weights. And so I decided to see if I could be the best that I could ever be at golf. And I turned into a golf addict, even though I had played as a duffer since I was in high school. And I told you to find me the biggest golf addict in the Marshall Center.
That's right.
And you introduced me to Bradley Waits, who was on the top floor of the management building, and he was chief of protective services.
Absolutely.
And Bradley and I became not just best friends, but he would come out and caddy for me during the Bob Hope Chrysler Classics when I was on as a celebrity because of after doing Spaceship Ones.
Right.
And I ended up making numerous trips. In fact, I'm still planning one as soon as COVID's over here with Bradley. But he was a big part of my life after that, and I would have never met Bradley Waits if it weren't for you.
Yeah, it was really just a whole string of events. And, one of the other things, back to a moment that happened, the time when we were all eating at the Space and Rocket Center, and all of a sudden Ernst, in that quiet voice that he had, looked over, and he, if you remember him, and remember how quiet and soft his voice.
That was set up with the old timers.
Yes, exactly. And he said, Burt,
there were maybe 8 or 9 of them there,
something like that. Yeah. And he looked and he said, Burt, it's as if I'm looking at Warner von Braun and speaking to Warner von Braun right now. Do you remember your eyes and the tears hearing that? I mean, and because he's your idol, he was your idol and my idol.
I could not have brought that out of my memory, but I have a faint recollection now. Yeah, and I had tears in my eyes.
Yes, it was just an amazing time.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so the other thing that was really significant about that time in 1998 in Huntsville was you gave that presentation to the AIAA meeting, and where you talked about the importance of a prize. Because so many of my audience doesn't really know about, aviation as such, talk a little bit about the role that prizes have played in aviation. And obviously you've won several of these prizes, and why that has pushed things so far in the past.
Well, of course, I recognized the manpower prize because Paul McCready actually came to our little airport with his pedal airplane to win the Kramer Prize. He scampered pretty quick when he found that the winds are never calm at Mojave. So he went over 60 miles west and found a good place to develop that thing, and he won the it was a Kramer, wasn't it? Man-powered flight. I'm I'm pretty sure it's a Kramer Prize. And of course, the significant thing about it is if you put up a significant prize, there'll be at least 40 times as much of that money spent trying to win it. So I'm thinking, why does the government put out research contracts? Why don't they just put out prizes? They'll get 40 times their money's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you remember? You're probably too young. Do you remember that aerospace plane called the something Express? Okay, the program was funded, and then when it looked like nobody had yet figured out that it was possible to do it, they chickened out and decided to discontinue the program. And there was debate on whether we spend another billion or whatever it was going to be to get to the next step on what would be, I think it would be like a Mach 8 or 10 airliner. That
maybe
would,
this was Dinosaur. Was it Dinosaur?
No. Dinosaur was orbital.
Right. Okay.
This is National Aerospace Plane.
Oh, the National NASP. Oh, yes, National. Yeah. That's right about when I came in. That's right, NASP.
But it was NASP.
Yep.
Okay. In when NASP was being debated, should it get canceled? I wrote a little thing that didn't go very far because I didn't have folk at that time. But anyway, I did a little thing called Logic Gone Amok. And it laid out that what the government ought to do is immediately cancel all the work on NASP and put up a prize for so many $1 billion. And the neat thing about it is if it is impossible to do NASP, the government would not end up spending anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody actually did it and said and showed that it's possible to do, why then it was being canceled because there was serious debate that says, oh, you can't do that. The engines melt and all this stuff that you can't do.
Right.
And, but if somebody won it, you give them, I don't care if they're a little outfit or if they're Boeing, you give them these billions of dollars cash.
Right.
And that was so logical and had no risk of downsize that I wrote this thing called Logic Gone Amok. Unfortunately, I wrote this thing in an Apple really early program, which I can't read anymore. but I did find some little cartoons that I had made up to make this.
So, in terms of aviation prizes and what you've done, talk a little bit about when you get started. I mean, technically our first meeting, although we didn't get to spend a lot of time together, we shook hands and we at least said hello because I was with Peter during the launch of the X Prize in St. Louis, Peter and Byron, Peter Diamandis and Byron Lichtenberg. And so we sat at a table and you got up and sort of somewhat jokingly threw your hat in the ring.
About 96 in St. Louis.
Yes, in St. Louis.
Oh, what happened there? Yeah, let me tell you what happened there. First of all, I didn't apply for that.
Right.
Other people did. You had to give them $100, and you had to reveal some things about your plan. That Peter wanted information so he could help promote. And what I didn't realize is he needed to raise the money. I thought he had some kind of commitment, or how did he come up with 10 million? Right? And I found out later, well, first of all, I never applied for the X Prize.
Never.
Never.
Not even after you flew. I mean, never.
What happened? There was rumors about that I might. Well, here's the thing. At that banquet, there were several speakers.
Right.
And since I had done all kinds of airplanes, I got up there and I said wonderful things about prizes. And I said, if I think I could win this, I might go for it. And that's all I said. And the press came out with Rutan is a front runner to win the X Prize. But anyway, Peter he kept haunting me. He said, "Hey, Burt, get applied here." And I says, "Well, why? Can I apply later if I decide to do this?" And he wanted to be able to say that the guy who's done 30 different airplanes is and whatever. And keep in mind, it was covert that Paul Allen funded my program all the way until after we went supersonic on the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers flight in December 17th, I think it is, Wright brothers flight anniversary.
Right.
Everybody's at Kitty Hawk with a press watching this thing fall into the mud and off the rail. And I did something real significant, and that is I was the first non-aerospace prime to build and fly a supersonic airplane.
That was great.
And that was a big thing to me. But Paul Allen still didn't want to admit or reveal that he was the funding source. If you were at my rollout, people were asking, "Well, where are you getting your money to do this?" And I just said, "It's the doesn't want to be, I'm not allowed to say."
Right.
And invited to that first powered flight was only one print media and one broadcast media. That's it.
Wow. So you
and Paul's friends. Paul didn't come. He wanted to be there, but he didn't want anyone to see him. And I think here's the thing: he was being beat up because of all the money that he quote wasted on broadband.
right.
Buying up cable companies and this big scandal with was it Charter Communications, and people were saying, people that love Gates, for example, are saying, "Gee, Paul, you wasted billions of dollars here that could have been used on AIDS in Africa or global warming. All this stuff that they do." And Paul, during that time period, would not go in front of a microphone because he just didn't have to take. He could stay away and didn't have to be beat up on by the press.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't call it shyness. I call it, that what he does with his own money, it's not taxpayer money, it's his own business.
Right.
But he didn't, he's a very different person than Gates in many ways. In fact, his autobiography called Idea Man is the only one that I know that tells the truth about Bill Gates. But at any rate, after that Wright brothers 100th anniversary day and hour, he saw such phenomenally good, all positive press about that he decided to reveal. I think it was within a week or three after the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers that he revealed that I'm the one funding this.
Right. I think when that reveal happened, one of the things I remember, the change in tone, obviously us knowing each other and getting emails and things like that, I was confident in what was going on, and knowing some of the people like Glenn and Luke and other people that were there early on.
Paul didn't want to be associated with something that was too risky and killed a test pilot and had no business of flying because it was done by some small shop in Mojave instead of the government of Russia or U.S.,
Right.
which are the only one at that time who had done this. Keep in mind, this was before the Chinese Senjiao flew. So it was only Russian government and U.S. government that could do this kind of stuff. But I told him the flight that we did on the 100th anniversary. I said, Paul, I think we've already done our most dangerous flight. That rocket motor is not throttleable. You can shut it off, but you can't do a half power burn.
Right.
Okay. And for that, the fact that we got to 1.2 Mach number from, was it 0.77 or something in 12 seconds, we were a lot lighter because we did have a partial load of fuel and oxidizer. So we had more acceleration, more Q. Our max Q of the whole program was that first flight.
Because you were lower in the atmosphere.
Well, we were lighter, so we accelerated.
Oh, faster.
We're still lower in the atmosphere.
Got it.
Right. So, and we put the biggest loads on it. We did something that Aerospace would think I'm an absolutely stupid to try, and instead I took a manned airplane and flew it from subsonic to transonic to supersonic, and immediately came back through the Mach. And I had never done any wind tunnel testing for transonic or supersonic. And in fact, I hadn't even done subsonic wind tunnel work.
But you had a styrofoam model that you used.
Glider the tower. The thing that throws the gliders off the tower is not a wind tunnel test.
Right.
It's such a Reynolds number. It doesn't mean anything. It's just something. I wanted to just see that you can throw that thing backwards and it straightens out. I just wanted to see it happen. I knew it was going to, but I learned only what I already knew, and I didn't learn what I needed to know. Okay, I took horrendous risk by asking my friend Mike Melville to go supersonic in this thing without any. We didn't have high quality CFD. Well, actually,
no, I think you did. Jim Teague was doing those.
We were running fluent.
You were running fluent.
We were doing it with a guy who had never done it before. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And Boeing would never do CFD without backing it up with wind tunnel tests.
Right.
Now, Boeing uses very, very sophisticated CFD, but on the most recent airplane, they did more wind tunnel tests than they did on the first one. And you can argue, why did you do any at all?
At the same time you were doing that, I was doing CFD on swimming pool drains, if you'll remember. So I had a Ceta Fluent that I was using, and I was doing a CFD on swimming pool drains, trying to convince the industry that drains don't filter swimming pools.
but anyway, first of all, I argued that we're gonna things get a lot more stable as you know, going supersonic, to where they're harder to make a turn.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have had a relatively large departure and not gotten a lot of Q because we started at 50,000 feet.
Right. You also had a CG advantage because your CG was shifting forward.
I could have had a 50-degree departure which is something that any booster rocket, they push the button to blow it up,
Mm-hmm.
and still ran the engine out, and I still had enough range to glide back from Bakersfield and land at Mojave, which is 50 miles.
Wow.
So I didn't consider it risky. The fact that, hey, if it doesn't seem right, we just shut it off, write it out, and we're not going to break up because we're low Q. So I made these arguments in my own head. My own people thought I was crazy, frankly, when I said we're going to do a Mach 3.5 airplane that does it going straight up, and the fastest thing we had done was Triumph, which is a business jet at 0.77 Mach.
Right.
That's a big jump,
Yes.
and you're going to do it without doing the appropriate wind tunnel testing. I wrote an Excel spreadsheet to predict the whole trajectory and performance of Spaceship One, and my aerodynamist guru, I had two of them. Jim Ty was the second one. I've forgotten the name of the first one. He quit. But those guys did a lot of much more sophisticated analysis. As it turns out, my little Excel program predicted everything within 2%.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know why I was confident in that. I don't know why I was confident that Voyager could make it around the world. We had so much scatter in that data, because when you look at something with that kind of a wing loading and L over D, the slightest little bit of movement of the air scatters the power required data all over the place. Voyager, what we did was just hundreds of speed power points and fared through the middle of horrendous scatter. And I had to trust that that was the right answer.
Yeah.
And Voyager ended up when you correct for its losses, the leaked fuel and the draggy wingtips, it came up within a percent of the original prediction.
Right.
Excuse me, not original prediction, the prediction from our flight test data. That being said, the worst mistakes I've made in design, and they're huge ones, has been on the 49th airplane. And it's cost me 5 or 6 years of my retirement, and it's just damn near killed me because all the work I've had to do on it. The ski gull.
Yeah. Talk a little. Actually, before you get to the ski gull, talk just real quick for our audience. The Voyager happened in around 1983 or 84. Is that right?
Dick and Gina and I, in other words, I showed him the preliminary design in 81, and they went off to raise $1.5 million, maybe $2 million, so that they could get somebody to build the wing, somebody else to build the fuselage, and they would do the avionics and engine installation. That was their plan. That was 81. A year and a half later, they finally gave up. They found a lot of people who wanted to fund it, but when it goes to top management, they look at it as their logo on the tail as it's sinking into the ocean, So it always got shut down. Baron Hilton later said it was the biggest mistake he ever made was to not fund Voyager. But we got it going based on a business plan that Dick and Gina, neither one of them have written about it. I don't know why I think they shouldn't be embarrassed on it. I am damn proud about it, and I'm going to tell the whole story in my bio, but Gina didn't do it in her book. And when Dick did his book, I dubbed it before I read it as the nonfiction version of Gina's Voyager book. Really. But as it turns out, Dick got talked out of telling the truth about Gina by his wife and his Kelly. So they wanted the book to be very positive as a story about courage and success. So they didn't tell the Voyager story.
Mm-hmm.
But by God, somebody's got to tell it, and I wish he had done it, but I'm going to have to tell the Voyager story, both how it was done from a business, and also from the extortions that Gina did.
Mm-hmm. But you were able to circumnavigate the world without stopping. That was the ultimate record-breaking part of that, is the nonstop unreal.
Yeah, we didn't take a shortcut. That thing flew more than the equator.
Oh, it did.
Oh yeah, it flew about 1,000 miles more than the equator.
Wow.
Now later on, Fawcett, who thought it would be, well, first of all, Fawcett came to me and wanted a Voyager. He says, "Build me a Voyager. I need an autopilot." Voyager had an autopilot, and the thing I'm really good at is I can take 5-minute naps several times a day, and I don't need to sleep beyond that. And it turned out that was true. I mean, he flew that first flight, I think, was 68 hours, something like that, whereas Voyager was 215 hours. And every time the ground called him, he answered. Really weird. But the last thing I wanted to do was to build another Voyager.
Right.
I wanted to challenge myself with something that I had concluded earlier was not possible. And that is, could you fly around the world with a turbine engine?
Yes.
Which would allow you to do it at 50 or 60,000 feet and smooth air and 30% of the time. And so I refused to build a Voyager for Fawcett. And I talked him into doing what became Global Flyer.
Oh, right.
And I did the preliminary design on it, but the detailed design of the whole program was John Carco. And he was so good that I did very little oversight on a program, on something that had to be right at its weight, which was a lot more aggressive than Voyager in terms of fuel fraction. He actually came out beating that goal, whereas almost every other airplane was 7% heavier than its original weight estimate.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing, and that's a neat story. This is out of I won't tell the Global Flyer story.
Yeah.
That'll be a chapter that's more interesting than you think it's going to be.
So let's go back to Spaceship One.
Ray, I'm really bad at going around the barn and talking about things that you didn't ask me, so I'll shut up and let you steer this. It takes too long.
Oh no, when Burt Rutan is giving me the yoke, I'm in trouble. But no, well, so let's just continue where we were, because I mean these are interesting because really and truthfully, just to sort of, I want to put 2 points together. So we're sitting under the wing of a Long Easy, which is a for our audience, it's a plane that people build, a home built plane that Burt designed. And
we're sitting in the grass of the home built.
Right.
Had I met you before then?
Well, we only met at the X Prize, but we really spent time that day because of the Germans. Basically, you pushed everybody away. We just sat there and talked, and everybody was coming up, but we were just focused and mind locked on the Germans and on space, and you were relaying your stories, et cetera. But when we were sitting there, to give everybody the context, this is, I don't know how many planes come in. Hundreds of thousands of people come in, but I mean, they have planes like landing and taking off every 2 minutes. And so we're sitting there, and most of these planes are all home built or experimental planes. And so what Burt was talking about was, it's a shame that we don't have spaceships out here. It's a shame that we don't have people building spaceships and creating astronauts and really doing this in a different way. And so fast forward to 2004, you and I really pushed hard on Konrad Dannenberg. Now, Konrad was one of the program managers for the Apollo program, one of the original German scientists that came over. And again, he was my mentor for, 27 years. We spent so many times together, so many memories. But Burt and I ganged up on Konrad because he canceled on us 2 or 3 times. But both Burt and I selfishly wanted him at 95 or 96, however old he was at that moment. But we wanted him to come out for the Spaceship One launch. And I don't know if you remember this because you were obviously crazy busy going up to it, but Konrad had canceled and then went and canceled. Finally, I convinced him, look, if I have to put you in a wheelchair and push you all the way to the Mojave, I will. And
well, I've got pictures of him inspecting the nozzle just after the first, I believe it was our first space flight of June 21st.
Yep, that's when we were there. And in fact, he signed the nozzle of the Spaceship One that's hanging in the Air and Space Museum. He signed the nozzle. In fact, it was Glenn May who toured us, because Glenn was from not far from here, from Huntsville. So I had met him. And so Glenn was the one that toured us all around the engine facility in the back. And I mean, Konrad was so fascinated. And if you'll remember, one of the things he said was, he remembers seeing the first flight. And, he was there for the first Apollo. He was there for all the rockets from Peenemünde. But he said, other than their first flight in Peenemünde of launching rockets, that your flight was more exciting. And he put it as more exciting than the Apollo, because he felt like in his lifetime, he never thought that it might even be possible for a non-government agency to fly in space. And what you represented, not just to him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, what you represented, not just to him, but to Ernst and to all of them, was really what their dream was. They had this idea that space tourism and all of this space stuff would be going on. And really what happened is they all got sort of shoveled away, and, it was a political stunt in some sense. And suddenly he's out there watching this, and it was just phenomenal to be standing there with him. In fact, Elon was with us too. That's actually where I met Elon Musk for the first time, was at that launch.
Elon Musk was there?
He was there, yeah. That's where I met him. He was there.
Wait a minute. Which flight? Which of
June,
the 3 flights?
He was there for the first flight, the June flight, the June 20.
He was?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was only a year after he started SpaceX.
That's right. And he and Konrad sat together and talked.
I didn't know. Did I meet him then?
I'm sure you did. Yeah, he was there. Yeah. I mean, you remember, it was really crazy because the FAA didn't know what they were going to do. I mean, the whole thing, it was it was kind of a whole crazy evening.
Oh, the FAA Keystone Cop thing is a wonderful chapter in
I
my book.
can't wait to read that. I mean, I was there and I know a lot of those things, but I can't wait for everybody to read it.
I'm going to publish all the letters and so on. It's
I remember, and I can't wait for people to hear it. But here's what I can say is that
I'm going to do that when I'm so old that nobody will worry about. I'm going to do it when they think I'm senile.
There you go. So anyway, Konrad and I think it was Konrad. It was Elon Musk, and Ed Wu. He was an astronaut. He was out there, and I think Ulf Merbold, who was from the Deutsches Zwei, the D2 mission from German. It was a Space Lab mission. So they were all there, but it was really interesting. And so Elon exchanged emails with me and Konrad, and here's what I'm going to tell you. Every single launch that Elon attempted, whether he succeeded or failed, and especially when he failed, Konrad would write him a letter and tell him, don't stop, don't give up, don't stop. And Elon and I, later, we talked about this. We were going to memorialize Konrad on one of his vehicles at one point, but it sort of fell apart somehow. But what was so amazing is this gets back to some things you and I have been talking about recently that was really positive, is that even though Elon came second in terms of, he came behind the curve here in terms of, getting into the X Prize and winning, he still kept on and was able to go orbital. But more importantly is that he wears his failures right out there in a public way.
Absolutely, that's super important. But are you saying that Elon Musk was an X Prize participant?
Yeah, at the time he wanted to do X Prize too. Absolutely, that the Falcon.
I didn't know that. I did tell you that I never signed up for the X Prize, but Peter Diamandis, he paid the $100 himself, and he signed me up.
He may have done the same for Elon. Who knows? But he was there.
Well, first of all, I knew once I started talking to Paul and decided to do that, which was it was 2000. I knew that my program would be covert, and I didn't know when it would be. I assumed that once it was rolled out that it would no longer be covert, but I never realized that would still be that Paul was a funder would still be covert for another, as it turns out, 8 months, another 7 or 8 months later. I didn't want Peter Diamandis to know that I was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
He would call me. Peter would call me and he says, "Burt, you are building a spaceship, aren't you?" And I says, "Peter, I'm an airplane guy," and first of all, the thing what it did, it let me go to Peter and I says, "Listen, there's a rumor about that you don't have the $10 million." And he says, "You're right. I'm still trying to raise it." And he says, "I've raised $5 million." And so I'm asking him, and this gave him a hint that I didn't really want to give him. I says, "So that if I go out and win it next month, I get $5 million?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." Well, I found out later that wasn't true, that Peter did indeed raise $5 million, but he spent it on himself and his staff, and thinking that he would come up with somebody who would give him 10. But he actually ended up spending that and getting to the point where he had to, just to keep it alive with that first hole-in-one insurance thing.
Right.
I think he had to mortgage his house. It's a wonder that the X Prize actually happened, because it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the Ansaris, because it was named after them, but what they did was merely fund a 1-year extension to the hole-in-one insurance policy.
Right.
Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I know the whole story.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell that whole story because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And the great part about it is, history is messy.
The story has not been published.
Right. History is messy, and a lot of times we want to shine it all up and tell it in a perfect way. And I agree. It's like, this is back to what I think is great about Elon, is that he does not mind putting the messy side out there. And I think that that's fantastic.
Beat up on Sir Richard Branson by cutting off his videos of his what does he call it, Virgin Orbit. He called it. He stayed with the theme, Spaceship Two. He called it Launcher One, and he showed like 3 different cameras on that, and all of them shut off exactly the same time. He doesn't want to show a failure.
Right.
And I told him, I says, Elon shows his failures.
How not to land a spaceship. Isn't that the best video ever?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh.
And, I mean,
humor.
Musk will go there and live stream his stuff.
Yes.
But Sir Richard, I don't think he'll ever release the failure of Launcher One's launch.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm gonna. Well, I don't know whether I'll publish that. Maybe later. But I really beat up on Sir Richard about transparency.
Right.
Transparency has a lot to do with your with your legacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the last things I want to talk about, Burt, is something that, you know, has really the one thing that you put into my life, even really before the aerogel flights and all this stuff when we were spend our time together. And I just it was amazing to have the access and all the emails that you BCC'd me on, all the things that I got to peek in sort of a voyeuristic way. But the one concept that I really grabbed onto was this idea of having confidence in nonsense if you want to innovate. And I want you to share some of that with our audience, because really and truthfully, what I've been doing, even in diabetes and metabolism and things that we're working on, it is so easy for people to think science is democratic and that you just vote on the right answer. And if enough people agree, that somehow that's it. And yet, what you've proven time and again, and in fact, what all innovators have proven time and time and again, it really only takes one person to press beyond a certain point and demonstrate it to take out the majority.
Confidence in nonsense has been misquoted more than it's been properly quoted.
Okay.
I mean, and I'll tell you what I say in my talks. I have a slide on confidence and nonsense, and what it is I ask the audience to think about a big breakthrough. And a breakthrough is something by definition that you didn't know about before, but once you realize it and you recognize that, wow, this is something important and something that we didn't have before this breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's really important for you to understand what a breakthrough is. It's not a forecast. It's something that actually happened, which improved the technology that existed before the breakthrough. Right? Okay, so now, and then I ask people, I says, think of a breakthrough, okay, and they'll think about all kinds of things, from medicine to airplanes to whatever. I give talks to all different kinds of audiences, and then I ask, well, before that was recognized as a breakthrough, wasn't it assumed to be nonsense?
Right.
Why do you try to do a breakthrough? Why do you try something as nonsense? Now, it isn't the logical, and you can argue it isn't the smart engineer who gets the breakthroughs, because he doesn't even try to do something that's nonsense. It's the wacko, the crazy guys like me and others, and Musk is certainly one. He had confidence he could reuse a booster, and everybody who did boosters just assumed it was impossible, right? That was a breakthrough, and it was nonsense before, and it took Musk to do it because he didn't have the proof, the test data, and the test experience and whatever, that it was possible, but he had the courage to try something that was nonsense. He had confidence in nonsense, and nobody at NASA or Boeing, Lockheed, or even in Russia, they didn't have the confidence. They would have tried it. Of course, after one or two failures, they'd have just given up. But Musk wanted it to happen because he knew it was the only way he was going to colonize Mars in his lifetime. And he wanted to see that happen. But anyway, the bottom line, the people that achieve breakthroughs are not logical people. They're not organized, smart managers or engineers. It's it's you got to have confidence to try something that's nonsense, or you're not going to be able to have a breakthrough.
Given what you see today with the whole field, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Elon, and then the government stuff that's going on, what do you believe our chances are to sort of become a spacefaring nation and to be a place or a world? Just the idea that we have reached that point of a economic exothermic reaction in space, and that we will get to a place where sustainably governments won't be the gatekeepers. Do you think we've crossed that chasm yet?
Someone who's a lot more eloquent at presenting than me did a wonderful job of that. And it's the last 3 or 4 minutes of part 4 of Apollo What We Saw by Bill Whittle.
Mm-hmm.
You can't find that by Googling Apollo. You've got to find it by putting in the words "what we saw," and it doesn't have millions of views like all the other 50-year things that all the networks and NASA and whatever put out, but is by far the best. But what Whittle says in there is that us old timers who remember and cheered for Apollo during those wonderful 8 years, 62 to 69. After all these years, we had given up and thought that nobody's going to do this. But now, for the first time, we think we'll see things happen in our lifetimes. And then he dares. He dares Musk and Bezos, and he says, "I even double dare you." You've heard the words from that.
Yes.
That before, right?
Yes.
But anyway, I'm not quoting it right, but I do write it down and quote it verbatim when I give talks now, because I think what he says, not just about Neil Armstrong and that wonderful picture of him, which is just tear-jerking.
Yes. Well, the point he makes about Neil Armstrong as wanting to be in the background.
What he makes about, hey, this is going to happen now, and it's happening, and he tells the reason that it's going to happen, and I could not tell it better than Bill Whittle.
That's great. Well, Burt, I am so grateful to have met you, and so grateful to have had the privilege to get you to mentor me and give me advice in tough times and just be a part of really the history. And for me personally, I really believe when I saw the Falcon and the Dragon Crew Capsule, I don't want to call it Demo 2 either. I agree with you there. That was kind of a nonsensical name for such an amazing mission. But when I saw that launch, to me, it was the one thing I wish Conrad could have been there for, because that would have been Conrad, Ernst, all of them. That would have been just an amazing moment for them, and they wanted it to happen so badly that someone could launch with equipment that was all privately built. And even though the launches were funded by NASA, that doesn't matter. This is okay. The point is I think at that point we've been released, and it's just a matter of time.
I think you'll agree with me that if they had lived to see everything that Musk has done, and Bezos is reusing boosters, if they had watched those things land on what's the name of the barge now? There's 2 of them.
Yes, Of Course I Still Love You, and Just Read the Instructions.
I think they would agree that that's the most significant thing about us getting back, America getting back into the space business after the shuttle.
Right.
The shuttle was a horrible mistake. NASA refused to do anything cheap because they knew that shuttle would have to fly a lot in order to make it anywhere near affordable. And they worried that if something out there that was a better Soyuz and did a lot of flying, it would hamper their biggest program.
Right.
And that shuttle. And shuttle was a fantastic machine, but boy did it set us back.
It really did.
And another thing I want people to understand. I line up all the boosters, Redstone, all the U.S. boosters. Redstone, as soon as we flew John Glenn in an Atlas, we never ever flew a Redstone. And the Redstone's only that big around.
Right.
You just hold your hand. And it's real inexpensive. And as soon as we flew the Titan with Gemini, we never ever flew an Atlas, never flew a Redstone. As soon as we flew Saturn I, we never ever flew a Titan, Atlas.
Well, I mean, technically that's a cluster of Redstones, but still, your point is dead on.
And we shoot those. What I'm getting at, if we'd have followed that with development of airplanes, there'd be only one airplane in the world. It'd be the B-2 bomber. And the fact that we've got more than just a B-2 bomber tells you how stupid it was to not compete with Soyuz during all those decades. And up until just last month, we're buying $90 million rides, seats on a booster that was developed in 1967. It's weird that the Russians haven't done anything after Soyuz.
Right. They just kept building those. Well,
of course, if they, you certainly can blame that on the fall of the Soviet Union, and they flew Dennis Tito because they needed the money to keep their program from being totally canceled.
Right.
And now they're flying, or excuse me, not anymore. I guess we're not going to buy any more. Are we going to buy any more Soyuz flights?
I don't keep up with it at all. At this point, I keep up with those three programs, and that's it.
I think they better not.
Yeah.
People wouldn't like that at all. I mean, they charge, 4 times as much as they charge Dennis?
Mm-hmm.
And we just pay it.
Yep.
NASA just pays it.
Right.
But it's been an enormous. What NASA has done after about 1973, 74 has been damn embarrassing.
Yeah.
And when I describe it to a good friend of mine who used to be a NASA executive, remain nameless, he says, "Burt, you don't understand the big booster program. The fact that it's time to first flight gets a year farther back every year. That program, that schedule has never collapsed." He says, "You don't understand, Burt, this is a jobs program. And we have pieces in enough congressional districts that will get the NASA budget voted on. And that's no excuse to have a research. They're not doing a research. They're chicken to do research.
And we could have done so much. We could have done so much.
If they were doing research, if NASA did research after 1970, they would be reusing boosters like Musk did. That should have been done in the 80s.
I think Von Braun had a plan for the flyback liquid boosters too. I'm not sure that they landed vertically, but I'm pretty sure he designed one.
Never got funded. It's always nonsense, right?
Yep. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. And again, thank you for all of your guidance and all of your leadership and what you've done in the aviation community and the space community. I think we both can smile from our days sitting under that long easy when we were both frustrated with the space program. And, you know, it may have taken longer than both of us really wanted to happen, but
Well, what happened out there on the grass at Oshkosh really changed what I ended up doing for the 20 years after that, really.
well, that's amazing. I know you changed what I was doing. So there's no doubt that I probably would have taken a completely different path had we not met. And so I'm very grateful.
And being up there on that mountain east of Huntsville with Ernst barbecuing our dinner himself.
That's right. I'm looking at pictures of that right now.
Getting a tour of our of the astronomical observatory, which was built by the hands of the old timers up on that mountain.
Out of a fuel tank, Apollo fuel tank.
The fact that every one of the paperclip guys played an instrument, the fact that Huntsville got an cultured and got an symphony
Yep.
in a symphony hall. Look what they did for America.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, thank you for joining us, and I am just so grateful for everything you've done for me. I really appreciate it. I really love having you as a friend.
Likewise, Ray. Thank you.
Thanks, Burt.
Okay. You bet. Bye-bye.
So from 2004 to this time, 2009, Elon and Conrad and I would email each other every time Elon tried to do a launch and had a failure or had all kinds of issues happening. At one point, Elon tells the story, he had this one launch, and I have the emails when we were talking back and forth on this, but had that launch not gone, it was the end, and Elon would have lost everything he had. I mean, he literally poured and put everything he had on the line for SpaceX. And I'm sure some people will tell that story around the halo around what happened yesterday. But the important...
Well, even he said it yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And he was so emotional, he couldn't even put sentences together. It was quite extraordinary to watch.
And I felt the same way, even though obviously I didn't have what to lose, but I was emotionally invested in this thing. And I was right there. These were all people that were my close friends, and we were all doing this. We were all consciously doing this. Everyone thought we were crazy, just like they do now with diet.
Well, okay. And another thing he said yesterday in his interview was that we must consider a multiplanetary life. Like, this is where we need to move forward to. And this is what he really seems passionate about. The next steps are us to be able to live and travel back and forth to different planets. And so what do you think about all that?
Well, I'll come back to that, because I'll just say this last part of commercial space that ends with yesterday, which is why it was so important. So Elon did make it into space, and then Elon started trying to land the first stage. And remember, most rockets, all of those first stages end up in the ocean. You know, it's really like flying an airplane from LA to Nashville and then only keeping the seats.
Throwing it in the garbage, yeah.
You can't have private spaceflight that way. And so Elon was focused on a facility that was creating lots of engines, the same engine. So there are more engines at the bottom, they use more, but then also in recovering it. And so I think everybody probably at some level has understood that SpaceX did this. But here's the point. We could have never done it at NASA. Mm-hmm. And I know that's going to make some of my NASA friends upset to hear me say this, but in a mature bureaucracy, there's a rule against everything. And one of the problems I had, and one of the reasons I left NASA, is because it was so bureaucratic. And even in watching the coverage yesterday and during the scrub, it gave me this nauseous feeling of how NASA scrubs everything, and it's got to be scripted, and everybody's got to, they've got to create heroes. And, it's not like what was going on in the Mojave, what you just heard described. It's not like the energy when I've seen all of these SpaceX flights that weren't NASA related. bunch of really young people in t-shirts, not all stuffy ties, and they're just like really excited, and all of them really know what they're talking about. They're not, you're not there because, you know, they're the right political person to be there. And I mean political person in the sense of the organization has all politics. It's always about making someone's political favor here and political favor there. It was just, you know, having worked all those missions and done TV for NASA. I used to do science summaries that were, you know, would be on CNN and stuff like that at the time. It was just amazing that everything was scripted. You couldn't make a mistake. And, you know, one time when we were doing a Space Lab PAO training event, Ken Money, I remember him saying this, you know, he was talking about then the Hubble Space Telescope, that when it was first launched, it had an issue called a spherical aberration, which the lens was curved incorrectly, so it made it sort of short-sighted, so it made fuzzy images. And we had to put in and install, my friend of mine, Jeff Hoffman, and another friend, Mike Massimino, did these spacewalks, which were amazing, installed the cameras that corrected the optics so that we had all these amazing Hubble pictures. But what Ken said was so important. He said, you know, listen, when you're doing PAO and anyone's interviewing you from outside of NASA, just remember this. People have no idea what your thing does when it works. So they may not understand what your experiment does. They might not understand what the Hubble Space Telescope does. But you know what they can understand? It was expensive and it's broke. And so all of the coverage, remember, he said all of the amazing thing, they covered all of this stuff. Right then, they covered all of this stuff about the Hubble Space Telescope and all the amazing things it was going to do with our view into the universe. And yet, the only thing you could hear was that it was broke, expensive, or broke. And that was my first lesson. And then also Challenger was my second big lesson in realizing that eventually the media would become as worthless as it is today. And the reason I say that is because it's all about sensationalism and clicking. And it's really, really unfortunate that people who could be telling great stories decide to tell manipulative and persuasive stories to move people in other ways. And so ultimately I can say that I learned, you know, through that, the idea of what Elon was doing. Every time that first stage would come back and it would hit the deck and it would tip over, you know, Elon would tweet out, oops, oh, well, you know, better luck next time. And the great thing was, since it made it to space, nobody could say anything. What he wanted to do with his first stage was up to him. And he was allowed to fail. No, he wasn't allowed to fail. He took the ability to fail. And it took that ability because our early program failed all the time too. We had rockets failing on the launch pad left and right when the Germans were building these in the 60s. And yet, suddenly, in this mature bureaucracy that there was a rule against everything, everything needed to be certified to be space qualified, space hardware. And it was the most ridiculous set of things. Now, there were some things that you want to make sure. I mean, obviously, there's certain things that if you're going to space, you want to make sure it works. But there were other things like, you know, the Space Lab camera we used at the time, when camcorders were just ubiquitous in the late 90s, and you could have all these kinds of cameras. You know, phones were starting to have cameras at some point. And we were using a camera with a sequential filter on the front. And what this means is a black and white camera that was timed perfectly with a little lens that opened and closed. This is a video camera, and a red, green, and blue and clear piece of plastic was on a wheel spinning in front of the lens. And every time it was taking those 4 pictures, and those 4 pictures were then red, green, blue, were getting assembled into a colored image. Or if you remember how red, green, blue dots, if you look real closely on monitors, they're 3 pixels, or if you look at one of those big pixel screens. And this is in 1990, we were doing this. That's how we were getting video down from Space Lab. And so my point is, we could have grabbed a Sony camcorder for $800, tossed it in there, and throw 3 extra ones just in case. so that if that one breaks, the other 3 we still have, and recorded stuff and sent it down. It would have been beautiful images. Instead, we used this $8 million camera that had shitty video, and there was no way to update it. And I even did this. I even presented this in our space lab. I said, why don't we do this, and at the end of the mission, give the cameras away to schools? And they could have theirs a camera that flew in space, and then they would use it in their video department.
That's a cool idea.
Like, I mean, even if we bought 100 cameras, we wouldn't be spending $8 million, and the video would look great. So anyway, it was that kind of nonsense. And gosh, what I loved about Elon and Burt is they both had such a tenacity. They had both a tenacity.
You have to do what they've done.
That they said, you know, what the hell? I'm just going to do this. I don't give a shit if I make a mistake. It's okay. They don't want to hurt Punny. They weren't doing it on purpose, but they were trying to push the limits. I mean, aim at nothing, hit it every time. And so this part of my life, so then this post-1999, post-NASA part of my life, you know, I was involved in zero-G through around 2004 through our maiden flight. And I did, you know, one of the things I did was we did the Matrix. So I was hired by what were then the brothers, they're now sisters, the Wachowski sisters, I guess. And we did the 2 sequels to the Matrix. And so I was one of their consultants on how Neo, when he gets control of gravity, how that happens. So we did all these script readings, and we ended up, they hired us for a week for $1 million to do all of the, to take Master Wu Ping and all the stunt doubles. And we did zero-G flights, and we captured just loads and loads of footage of how things happen so the animators could animate it later. John Gatiss was the guy who was behind a lot of those special effects in the Matrix. And it was really great. Bill Pope, who also worked with us on Apollo 13 when NASA did those zero-G flights. And I showed you the other day, I showed you some of those videotapes from, and Dan are some videotapes that we took with Kevin Bacon and Tom Hanks and everybody playing football. I probably should get some of that video up on YouTube. It'd probably be probably people would love that. I just want to point out that during this period, in the 16 years from the 2004 when Spaceship One flew and now, I'm there tangentially. Yes, Elon and I talked a lot. You know, our communication fell off in a couple of years, and then I lost his contact, and you know, now there's the moat, I'm sure, around him that it's just hard. At some point, we'll run into each other again and exchange contact information. But Burt and I have continued to stay in contact. As you know, this week it was kind of interesting. He was sort of trolling Richard Branson about the differences in the flights and what Elon Musk is doing. And I'm thinking, under what universe am I looking at emails to Richard Branson and Elon Musk and all these? I mean, it was just really crazy to think I'm reading all this stuff. He kept sending me all of these really amazing things, and I love when he does that because it makes you feel connected and in. But really, that gets us down to yesterday, and that is that all of this effort and all of what we were doing was just something focused on what Peter Byron and I really wanted, was the idea that a commercial private company for profit could build a rocket and build a spaceship, whether it was a capsule or a winged vehicle, it didn't matter, and that we could fly privately into space. And why that's so important is because it takes so much energy to get out of what we call our gravity well. There's so much energy it takes to get to low Earth orbit. And then once you get to low Earth orbit, it's a lot easier to get around in the universe. It becomes easier and easier. It doesn't take as much energy. It just takes long times. And so what this week represented to me basically was my entire life dream of something coming true, that for the first time, a vehicle lifted off the pad. And it happened to be at Kennedy Space Center, a place that I've been so many times before. You know, the night before shuttle or the day before shuttle launches, I used to be out crawling around, walking on the little arms, standing on the very tip top of the external tank, looking down, walking literally in between the shuttle and the external tank on one of the floors, or out to the White Room, right to the opening of the door. just sitting in the doorway, or we loaded our payload into the doorway. So we would bring something right up to the edge and then watch as the engineers, the tech, would bolt them into place, knowing and calling our buddies who were in quarantine that we're going to fly the next day. And we're like, hey, we're out in the white room, and they're loading aerogel up into the orbiter. And they're like, yeah, we're going to fly tomorrow. And what it's hard to explain to people is that for those people, they're just us. Like they're smart people, but they're just us. And, imagine you're going on a camping trip with you and a bunch of your friends, right? You're like really high-fiving. And yes, they're serious and they've trained well and all of those kinds of things. But everybody's just excited. It's like, holy shit, we're really getting to do this for a living. This is just like how you and I feel. Well, a lot of times when we're doing this or interviewing neat people or on Amazing Travel, we're looking saying, wow, this is your life. Like, this is crazy that we're sitting in a temple in Thailand. Like this, it's just crazy. So it was the same kind of thing that we've experienced on the food side and with some of the really neat people there, but that was what they were doing. But it was common. Like these were all the people I worked with all those years. But so I can imagine the excitement doing up to it, but the same walkway, because the OPF, Orbiter Processing Facility is what they used to call it. But anyway, the OPF, the place where we would load up the orbiter and work on the orbiter before it would be attached to the rest of the vehicle, there was a lab adjacent to it, and there was a place where the quarantine, where all the astronauts were upstairs. And we had labs downstairs, so we would be doing all of our chemistry and preparing payloads downstairs, and then that would be going up. And then when the crew was going out to the pad, what would be great is we had all of our NASA passes and facility passes, so we would be standing there in that line of people you see clapping. You see them coming out the door, and they turn, and they get into this old silver Airstream camper thing to go out to the pad. And so it was like the 60s, because that's what they did forever. It was this famous thing. I think it's in a museum now, but it was this famous transport vehicle. And even they have these, would say, clumsy flight suits, the orange ones that came. Originally, they were in these blue space suits that looked like space camp suits. They were just jumpsuits, that just regular flight suits and a helmet. And then they transferred to this idea, these orange, after Challenger, we got to have these pressurized suits, et cetera. So they'd be all suited up and walking out, waving, and they all get into the 1960s camper and go out there. And yesterday, these guys, they're in this really freaking cool looking suit. And it looks lightweight. It looks cool. And they got these really great, cool helmets. And they get into freaking Tesla and drive out to the pad. And then they get into the vehicle. The vehicle's so clean. It doesn't have all that old anodized aluminum everywhere. And the big switches with the switch guards. Yeah, it's all like flying a Tesla to orbit, right? And it's just like when Elon did that sort of, I think, major fuck you, where he launched his Tesla when he was doing this thing and launched it, originally to go around Mars, and put him in the suit, so he's got a mannequin in the suit playing David Bowie's song. And it's just like, this is great. Like, this is real human life. We were not allowed to do this in NASA. Everything had to be this sterile, awful, like Burt would say, only NASA can make space boring. And I felt a little of that, because during the first day with the scrub, I was watching a NASA channel and watching their coverage, and it was just awful.
There was quite a difference.
It was awful. And I mean, just all the crap. I mean, people that are obviously working together, and they got damn plexiglass panes between them. I mean, it's like, look, guys, I understand we don't want to take risks, but the bottom line is, like, everything. When I was at the government, by that point, I can only imagine it's 10 times worse. Everything was about managing some kind of image. And it's like nobody could just like be human and do really quality work. And I just imagine, I know they've got politics at SpaceX, and I recognize that it's, I'm looking at it from the outside, so I have more rose-colored glasses on that. But man, Elon and Burt and Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, I mean, they have put some major human excitement, entrepreneurship, risk-taking, like the part of exploration we really need. And so what I saw yesterday, yes, it was a NASA launch. And it was really great that they were Bob and Doug all day. Because, like, what ordinary guy names are those? Those are just great. Like, everybody's saying Bob and Doug, Bob and Doug. You just have to love hearing that in terms of, they seemed like everyday guys. But there was this high-tech view of the capsule and all that, and the launch coverage and all the video. Wasn't $8 million sequential camera bullshit that looked horrible. No, we got really good video. We got video of the separation, and we got names, the name of the thing.
I love the name.
I
love you always. But
no,
yes,
I still love you. Yeah, and
that.
it's like, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
This is great because it's all real. And I love that part. And so as I was sitting there watching this thing, and I'm explaining to you what Max-Q is and what MECO is and SECO and what's going on and how you have to rendezvous with space station and orbital trajectories and, orbit inclination and all this stuff that we used to do all the time. Like I know this process so well because I did it for so long, so many hours training. And it doesn't matter if the vehicle is just a little bit different, but it's the same kind of thing. And as I watched it happen, and then even afterwards, Scott Adams did his Periscope and he was watching it live. He was so excited. He didn't know what was going on a lot of it. And back in the day, Scott Adams and I, when I was on console, that's how I got to know him. I just emailed him randomly from my NASA email address because everybody at NASA loved Dilbert. And so we actually became good friends back then. And I got to, email him again yesterday. But the idea that he was so excited about space, and that's what I want to see in people. I want to see that. And then suddenly when we post pictures, other people were excited, and people on Twitter were excited. And I got, I don't know, a half dozen random texts from people. You saw them coming in, just people I haven't even talked to for weeks or months. And they're like all wanting to make sure I'm watching this. And it was just an incredible day. So what it means, and I'll come to the interplanetary or the multiplanetary species. What it means right now is that Elon Musk, a private entrepreneur, has a space transportation system. And yes, NASA might lease it for now, and they may lease from Boeing and I think of the Atlas. I can't remember what the Starliner is going on. It's Boeing's version of a capsule. They might lease that one too. But Elon can launch himself into space whenever he wants. And because the first stage came back, it's reusable. It's reusable. And getting back to an email he wrote me in 2010, I was giving a presentation and he said, he wanted me to include something in this presentation I was giving. And he said, it says commercial space. He said, the critical invention is a truly reusable launch vehicle. For something that can be used 1,000 times, airplanes can be used much more than that. It is the difference between a rocket costing $100 million per flight or $100,000 per flight. This is the fundamental breakthrough that SpaceX is trying to achieve. And I really know at this point, we're going to get there. I mean, yesterday was a final completion, and Conrad and I would argue all the time, debate, fun. I mean, it wasn't an antagonistic thing. It was a more jabbing each other. Because Conrad said, they'll never happen if the government doesn't do it. And I said, it'll never happen if the government does it. It's got to be done privately. And I just remember like a night or two before he died, and I'll post the picture up here I posted some yesterday of the ones that I took of him. But we were sitting there looking at the videos on Virgin Galactic's page and on SpaceX's page in his room in 2009. This would be February 15th or 14th, something like that, 2009. And he looked at me and in his thick German accent said, Raymond, I think you're finally right. I think you're right. I think these guys are going to do it. And the other thing, and I have this recorded too. I recorded all this that day. I have my iPhone. I recorded the audio. And he said, We went to the moon. So what? You know, what do we have to show for it right now? Because we lost all that technology. We are not able to build those vehicles. And these guys, they won't do that. They'll do this with the hindsight. I would give anything that he was alive today or yesterday to see that. Because it would have brought so much joy to his eyes. And it was just like it is right now, a flood of emotions, because these guys, for all those years, they put so much time into me, and we had so much great times and stories together. And they had all these dreams going all the way back to Germany, all these dreams of traveling in space. I mean, the SS locked up Wernher von Braun because he didn't want to participate in lots of the other issues going on. And there's been people that try to vilify them in the sort of the Nazi war crime things, you know, but this is not who these people were. They gave up their country. They gave up everything to be here, and they actually did something that was amazing. And then most of them were forgotten. I mean, Wernher von Braun's headstone where he's buried is just a small little rectangular block, you know, with the Psalms on it and his birth and date that he died. No one would know that this man was an amazing, amazing engineer of our time. And I just see what Conrad, what he saw in all of the time he spent with education. I'm sure there's somebody out there listening that came to Space Camp and heard him lecture. I was doing a bunch of outreach programs to kids, but what I can imagine is that with Elon and Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos all doing this now, there's just no chance that we're not going to have that commercial access. I hope I get to fly. I hope I do. I don't have the resources to buy a ticket right now, and I wish I had. But I hope I do get to fly one day, just to sort of complete that whole circuit and be able to see that view, et cetera. But what I can say is that yesterday it became absolutely unequivocal that private space flight is here for the long haul. I think it's going to be really amazing. And so now to touch on that one concept at the end here and bring this to a close, because it's kind of a long, boring thing, a rambling thing. I hope anybody can get something out of this. But when we look at ourselves biologically speaking and think about the fact that we're one catastrophe from the only life we've ever known in the universe as being us, the idea of creating a system whereby we have humans on more than one planet is kind of an insurance policy, so that no matter how bad it might get, and we see that, we see issues and things that humans do, kind of stupid stuff from time to time. We're still tribal, but we got really big, technology behind that tribalism. And it's really important that we find a way to get our DNA in other places besides the Earth. With that said, everything we know, Earth, we will talk about this in Biosphere 2, but Earth is materially closed with the exception of a few asteroids and things that hit the Earth. For the most part, what's here is here, and we just find it and reuse it and put it back in some other form. So we take it out in this form and put it back in the Earth in that form. And yeah, we can pollute and we can talk about all of those kinds of things, but ultimately the Earth is a place where it's really easy to have life. And us being able to truly get to these other planets and be able to live with a colony or a group of people on that other planet so that we do diversify life a little bit is really going to be an important thing. And it's amazing that just like everybody right now might think, oh, we're going to colonize Mars. If you hear that, which we were talking about in the 60s and 70s, we were all about colonizing Mars. And we should have been there a long time ago. However, when you hear someone like Elon say it, just remember, they were all saying the same thing about zero-G. They were all saying the same thing about private spaceflight. They were all saying stuff, we can't fly, we can't cross the Atlantic, We can't land man on the moon. And those people were wrong every single time. You have to have confidence in nonsense if you want to innovate. That's what Burt Rutan taught me. Because if you go to any really innovative idea and go to the time just before it, to the most people, it seemed like nonsense. And like those examples I just gave. And really and truthfully, to relate it to what we're doing, is it probably seems nonsensical to a lot of people to eat the way we eat.
I was going to say that I experienced that right after, becoming a dietitian, and just saying I'm going to just eat plants was so disruptive. And it's still, people still think it's a little crazy, but it has changed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a very small fraction of the intensity of what you're talking about.
And to our clients, when they think, okay, we have a person starting tomorrow. When these people start, they're thinking, oh my gosh, am I really going to do this? Mm-hmm. And then when they finish, like we had the people today, like for example, I just toss it out there. Michelle got on her airplane, and not only did she not need a seatbelt extender, not only did her hips not touch the seats on either side, but she looked at the picture and sent us a picture because she could actually have stuff hanging out of the seatbelt where she tightened it. And more importantly, she could cross her legs. I mean, this is a woman that started at 450 pounds, and now she has a normal life just eating plants. And people think we're crazy because we push people not to swallow, and normal and not crazy and responsible is to surgically rearrange someone's intestinal tract so they can't swallow. And I don't mean any disrespect to people that have this surgery, but I think it's awful that physicians won't take the time to tell them they're not broken.
Give them the option.
That's right. They don't have the option
to know that there's an option.
That's
and
right.
That they have a choice.
And I don't care how crazy it is. I want to touch 10,000 people and make that real. I know it can be done as sure as I know that commercial space could be done 25 or 30 years ago. So many of our clients, they're physicians, and I feel so sad for them, but so many of them have no idea they can correct blood pressure with diet. They have no idea they can correct their blood glucose with diet. And even if they know, they don't believe they'll really do it. And we see it all the time.
This week, I can't wait. We have a client going to her doctor, proving herself
and
right.
She
corrected her blood pressure.
And I randomly decided this morning to pop my blood pressure cuff on, and 106/67.
After a salty dinner, I might add.
Yeah, after a salty dinner, kind of a somewhat rare and appropriate last night. And it's amazing to me now, looking back on this career and looking back again on yesterday, it's not so crazy. And where we're going to be in 10 or 20 years from now is going to be even better. I mean, it's really going to be better.
We needed this. We needed yesterday. Like, there's so much else going on in the world, and contextually speaking, we need this is exciting. This is like inspiration. It's hope. And I'm really excited to watch you see this. It was more exciting for me to watch your face. As exciting as the whole thing was, I feel like I know at least part of how important and significant this was for you. And I think we all needed this.
Yeah, it was really an amazing day. And to get to, just to know that, that we're here, like there isn't any going back. It's how I felt. Again, I felt this way in 2004. And I felt this way when Peter and Byron and I and all the other people were at the X Prize, and at St. Louis Arch and starting the X Prize, and like I knew this would happen. Looking forward, we knew it was just a matter of time, and it's just absolutely unbelievable that we are here today. So that's our crazy story for the week.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Raymond. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this leafy green path to space and good health.
It's always the rocket fuel. So remember, keep beating right.
Thank you for listening to Science and Saucery. For more details about the content in today's show, or to contact Juliana and Ray, please visit us at healthspansolution.com.